August 14th, 2003. It was a hot day in the Northeast. Air conditioners across the region were running on high. The electrical transmission system was pushed to its limits. High currents flowed across the transmission lines, causing them to heat up and sag. Under the weight of heavy energy usage, the voltage in the city of Cleveland began to degrade, prompting system operators to ask their generators for more voltage support.
Hey, do you think you can help me out on that 345 voltage a little? Buddy, I'll push it to my max. You're only going to get a little bit. That's okay, that's all I can ask.
But pushing the unit to max was too much for the aging plant, and at 131, the voltage regulator failed, forcing the plant to shut down. The unexpected loss of the plant forced even more power to have to be imported into the Cleveland area, further taxing the already heavily loaded lines. At 2:02 p.m., the Stuart Atlanta line sagged into the forest below, burning the tops off of 5 trees. The ground fault tripped the line out of service for the rest of the day. About an hour later, the Chamberlain-Harding line in Parma, Ohio, sagged into a tree, causing it to trip. The auto recloser restored the line, only to trip again, this time permanently. 28 minutes later, 18-year-old Adam Mua heard a loud bang outside of his house. The 345 kV Hannah Juniper line sagged into a tree, causing a ground fault. 2,050 amps of fault current left little more than a charred stump where the 14-inch diameter tree used to be. A tree trimming crew was scheduled to clear that area that day and was only 3 spans away at the time of the fault. Despite the loss of these 2 electrical lines, a glitch in the SCADA system at First Energy kept the operators from knowing anything was wrong. The transmission operators were blind and didn't even know it. However, AEP, the utility to the south, was not blind and was growing increasingly alarmed at how heavily loaded their lines were becoming. The loss of the previous transmission line caused the Star South Canton line, linking their system to First Energy, to jump from 83 to 120% of its rated capacity. 3 minutes after the last line trip, they were on the phone with PJM, their reliability coordinator, asking to have the loading of the Star South Canton line reduced. The PJM operator was confused by the situation and did not act in time. 6 minutes later, the line had sagged into a group of trees and tripped. With the loss of the higher voltage direct route to Cleveland, the power, constantly looking for a path to load, began to flow through Akron's 138 kV system, instantly overloading it. All this occurred while the AEP operator was on the phone with PJM.
Yeah, it's open. South Canton Star is open. South Canton Star is open? Troy Cloverdale? Oh my god, look at all these open. We have more trouble. More things are tripping. East Lima and New Liberty tripped out. Look at that. Oh my gosh, I'm in deep. You and me both, brother. What are we gonna do? You need something, just let me know. Now something else just opened up. A lot of things are happening. Okay, South Canton Star. Okay, I'm seeing no flow on that. So what are we overloading now? We lost South Canton Star. The contingency is gonna overload, which is the Samus Star. The SE line is going to overload as a result of that, so I should probably talk to MISO.
Before the operator's eyes, 15 138 transmission lines across the Akron area tripped, dropping 600 megawatts of customer load. Akron was now completely in the dark. Akron was the first to lose power, and the outage was just beginning. Meanwhile, MISO, the RC for First Energy, had contacted them and informed them of the disastrous state that their system was in. Finally realizing they had been flying blind, First Energy began investigating the loss of the Hannah Juniper line. At 3:55 p.m., the 2 operators from MISO and PGM got in contact to share information.
AEP, it's looking like South Canton Star 345 line, and we are showing a contingency for that line of the Samus Star line. And one of them lost the other. Since they lost that line, I was wondering if you could verify flows on the Samus Star for me at this time.
Well, let's see what I've got. I know Energy First lost the Jupiter line too.
Did they?
They're still investigating that too, so Star Jupiter line was overloaded.
Star Jupiter?
And they recently got that under control here.
And when did that trip? That might have...
I don't know yet. I have not had a chance to investigate that. There's too much going on here now.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what made that one jump up so quick.
It may be a combination of both. You guys lost South Canton Star?
Yes.
And we lost Hannah to Jupiter, it looks like.
Yes, and we are showing overload on Samus Star and South Canton Star. So I was concerned, and right now I'm seeing AEP system saying Samus Star is at 1378.
Alright, let me see. I've got to try to find it here. If it's possible, I can go from here to Jupiter Star. How about 1109?
1109?
I see South Canton Star open, but now we're getting data of 1199, and I'm wondering if that just came after.
Maybe it did. It was in and out. It had gone out and back a couple of times.
Well, yeah, it would be no good losing things all over the place here.
Alright, I just want to verify that with you. I'll let you tend to your stuff.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
At the time of the call between MISO and PJM, the Samus Star line, the last link between Cleveland and southern Ohio, was at 110% of its rating and growing more heavily loaded every second. At 4:05 p.m., the line finally failed after exceeding 130% of its emergency amperage rating. Up until 4:05 p.m., decisive action could have put the successive overloads in check. The loss of the Samus Star line was the last straw. From that point on, no amount of action or inaction could stop what was about to happen. The stage was set, and the cascade was about to begin. Prior to the start of the outage, much of northern Ohio was importing large volumes of power from generators in Kentucky and Tennessee, but now a wall of dead transmission lines had split Ohio in half. As electricity still attempted to make its way around the edges of the wall, transmission lines became overloaded and relayed out on Zone 3 overcurrent. Like a zipper being unzipped, the divide between north and south grew and arched its way up through central Michigan. Without the aid of power imports from the south, generators in the affected area became overloaded and frequency plummeted. To protect themselves from damage, the power plants went offline. The rift continued northward, severing eastern Michigan from the west until it hit Lake Huron. The eastern boundary of the outage had now been set. At the same time, the last line to northern Ohio from the east also failed. Most internal generation had tripped, and now the cities of Detroit, Cleveland, and Toledo were drawing all their power from a single line with Canada. Energy surged up through Pennsylvania and New York and across Ontario and into Michigan. Over the course of 30 seconds, the flow across the Michigan-Ontario tie line went from 250 to 3,700 megawatts. Power was being drained out of New York and New England. Voltages across the region dropped and frequency became unstable. Automatic underfrequency load shedding dropped 1,700 megawatts of load in Cleveland, but still wasn't enough to balance the load with a few generators left, and the frequency continued to decline. The loss of more transmission lines and a substation islanded the Toledo-Cleveland area. Frequency within the island fell rapidly, and the last of the holdout generators finally gave in. Toledo and Cleveland separated into two different islands, and both went dark. The sudden loss of Ohio's North Shore caused generators in Detroit to go into overspeed. Detroit lost synchronization with the rest of the grid and also blacked out. The sudden loss of Detroit and northern Ohio instantaneously changed the direction of power flow. At the hour of 4:10 and 39 seconds, 3,700 megawatts were flowing from Canada into Michigan. But at 4:10 and 40 seconds, 2,100 megawatts were surging out of Michigan and back into Canada. To the east, transmission lines along the border of New York and Pennsylvania were relaying out just as they had in Ohio and Michigan. With the loss of the 500 kilovolt Branchburg-Ramapo line, the northeastern U.S. and eastern Canada had completely separated from the eastern interconnection and become an island. This island instantly began to disintegrate. New England separated from New York, Connecticut separated from New York, New York split into two, and Ontario separated first from New York, then from Michigan. Quick action on the part of ISO New England operators to drop excess load and quickly bring on generation allowed New England to survive the islanding almost completely unscathed. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Rhode Island, and parts of Connecticut managed to remain energized thanks to their efforts. When southern Connecticut separated from New York and New England, it blacked out within seconds. New York split between east and west. Eastern New York, including New York City and northern New Jersey, underwent under-frequency load shedding to attempt to arrest the declining frequency, but to no avail. Just as evening rush hour was about to start, the Big Apple fell into darkness. Western New York managed to stabilize after losing half of its load. The transmission system across much of the state remained intact, and power from generators at Niagara Falls kept the lights on in a narrow corridor stretching across New York State. With the frequency in Ontario declining, automatic load shedding activated. The load shed worked too well, and the frequency spiked at 63.4 Hz. Power plants across the region disconnected, and the cities of Toronto, Hamilton, and Ottawa blacked out. The cascade had finally reached its conclusion. From the loss of the Samus Star line in Ohio, the cascade took only 8 minutes. An estimated 55 million people were out of power.
We are in the midst of what appears to be a colossal and history-making blackout.
People trapped in elevators and buildings. They have activated the emergency command center.
You're staggering, trying to take in as much information as you can.
Mayor Bloomberg's advice is to go straight home.
The subway system is down.
Ottawa is completely without power now.
The lightning-quick domino series of failures.
Gotta go to the bathroom and you can't even go nowhere.
50 million people are thought to have lost power.
We've got a real crisis in our grid, and this is why, despite being a superpower, we have a grid that is comparable to a third world country, and that's not right.
The most immediate concern was for thousands believed to be stranded underground in the dark in the New York subway system or in elevators in skyscrapers.
The police are saying that the evacuation procedures are working, people are calm, and that they are getting out.
A normal August afternoon had turned to crisis. Around 50 million people across the U.S. and Canada were left without power.
All of Cleveland's water supply runs on electric pumps.
My water commissioner said, the people in the Heights have water for 3 hours. I said, water? I thought the electric was out. He said, Mayor, how do you think the water gets from the lake to the people in the Heights?
You can get along in the dark, you can get along in the heat, but water becomes a health and safety issue very quickly.
By all accounts, the Northeast blackout was a disaster of epic proportions. At that time, it was the second largest blackout the world had ever seen. Thousands of people had to be rescued from subways and trains and elevators. 11 deaths were directly attributed to the power outage. It took 2 days for most people to get their electricity back, and almost a week for everybody to be restored. In all the chaos caused by the outage, there were few who noticed that when the grid failed, it failed the way it was designed to. There are thousands of miles of transmission lines, countless substations, and hundreds of generators involved in the blackout. As it was designed to, the equipment dropped power rather than get damaged. Within minutes of the conclusion of the cascade, operators immediately set to work at restoring the grid. By the light of flashlights and emergency generators, operators began to work through predetermined procedures already written for a grid-down scenario. Black start generating facilities were fired up, and one transmission line at a time, the grid was put back together. After months of intense analysis of the blackout, NERC, the North American Energy Reliability Corporation, determined several key failures that led to the blackout. Poor software design and software bugs, a lack of situational awareness, poor communication between different utilities, and a lack of proper tree trimming which made the grid so shaky to begin with. Even though there have been several upgrades to the transmission system since 2003, there's a fundamental problem with the electric grid that not only has not been addressed, but has grown worse with time. That is, the electricity is often generated hundreds of miles away from where it is consumed. So long as there are regions in the United States that consume more electricity than they produce and are forced to import power over great distances, there not only is a possibility of a scenario similar to the Great Northeast Blackout, but it is quite likely to happen again.